13. The pound buys $1.32 and €1.19. LBC weather: rain over England and Wales will clear eastwards this evening. Clear spells for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but also some showers, staying quite windy overnight with a low of 2 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Lucinda Horsley.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, it's 3 minutes past 9. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. You can watch our next hour on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, the YouTube channel, Facebook or Twitter. And we have with us Jonathan Ashworth, Labour's Shadow Secretary of State for Health. We arranged this interview, I think, 5 or 6 days ago, not knowing what was going to happen today, Jonathan. Well, welcome.
Well, what a day it's been.
Well, it has indeed. And when you looked at your diary when this story came out and you thought, oh my God, an hour-long phone-in with Iain Dale, do I really want to do that? Well, credit to you for coming, first of all. I have to say that. But let's look at what's happened today. For those who've been living in an igloo for the last 12 hours or so, a recording of a conversation that you had with somebody who you thought was a friend about all sorts of different things relating to the election and the Labour Party and their chances and all the rest of it has been leaked to the Guido Fawkes website, ostensibly by the person that you had the conversation with. First of all, you must feel completely betrayed by that.
Well, I presume it's by Greg. I mean, he's not like my best friend. I wouldn't want to mislead people, but we've been mates. We went on a trip to America together in 2006, and he was a Conservative, I was Labour, but we've always been sort of matey and exchanged texts and met up for a beer every now and again and that sort of thing. And Greg has been sort of telling me that he was in a panic because Jeremy Corbyn was going to win and all these terrible things were going to happen, and he's been saying this to me throughout the campaign via text, getting increasingly sort of manic in his text messaging, to be honest. So we spoke on the phone and he starts asking me all these bizarre questions, and in the end I thought, well, I'm just going to take the take the piss on radio? It's after 9 o'clock.
It's after 9 o'clock. I think we can allow that.
I'm just going to sort of feed him a bit of bollocks because he's sort of doing my head in a little bit here with this, and sort of gave him a bit of nonsense and started telling him he's going to win and don't worry about it. But obviously, he's in the past has been very rude about the Conservatives to me. Even at some points when he's been in some of his jobs, has given me little bits and pieces to undermine his own Conservative government with, I remember he was very good when I was asking some questions in Parliament and around energy policy, for example. So look, it's one of those things. It's a dirty trick. And obviously it's because the Tories are worried they're going to lose because they know the NHS is in crisis.
But do you think this was planned? I've got the transcript of the whole thing here.
I do now.
I'm looking at the questions that he asked you, and I haven't actually clocked this before, but I'm thinking, I think these questions were designed to get something out of you.
Yes, they were. Of course they were. And I think at the time, I remember him asking them thinking, God, Greg, you're coming increasingly sort of manic here. So I thought, what am I going to do to sort of calm you down? He's telling me he's got booked tickets for the Eurostar. They're going to be leaving the country as soon as the exit poll comes out. And he's played me like a fiddle, hasn't he? He's completely played me like a fiddle. And I just think it's a shame because, as I say, I'm not pretending we're best mates, but we've been matey. And, he told me that the Conservatives probably aren't going to win Canterbury, which is significant because he used to be the chair of the Canterbury Conservative Association. It's obviously come out today because the Tories know they're on the back foot over the crisis in the NHS with, the 4-year-old toddler on the front page of Mirror yesterday.
Which we will come to. We're not just going to talk about this.
But that's why it's been going on. And, as I say, he's played me like a fiddle. I'm stupid for falling for it. It is a pretty desperate, dirty trick. But, if he feels that's the way to stop, to further the interests of his political party, then, that's what he's done.
But if he has played you like a fiddle, it's going to sound quite brutal, but how can we trust you as a cabinet minister not to be played by a fiddle by other people?
I think that's fair. And I think, maybe I'm a bit too trusting of people because I actually see the good in people. I don't actually see, we've probably got very different views of the world, but I think you're a decent guy,
Well, I'll tell you what, I wouldn't have done this to you.
So maybe maybe I'm too trusting of people because I care. I'm a people person. I care about people. That's why I want to run the health service, because the health service is about people. But I've been stitched up like a kipper, played like a fiddle, whatever the right sort of metaphor is. But if he thinks that's the right thing for him to have done, then
I should just say, if anyone was offended by your language a moment ago, we're very sorry about that. But I mean, clearly passions are running high on this, and I can completely understand that. You're going to cringe over the next 90 seconds because we are going to play a clip from the interview.
If you're in sort of small town Midlands and North, it's abysmal out there.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't like Johnson, but they can't stand Corbyn, and they think Labour's blocked Brexit.
Yeah.
So, I don't think they're long-term sort of gains for the Tory party, but I can well see them going Tory this election, and if Labour ever got its act together, they presumably would fall back. Do you sort of know what I mean? But then the other end of the sketches, I think kind of middle class graduates, sort of Remainy people, Labour's probably doing well and sort of Lib Dems are probably doing well, but not in big enough numbers to deny the Tories a majority, is what I think. I think in the security stuff, I've worked in Number 10. I think the machine will pretty quickly move to safeguard security things. I mean the civil service machine.
So you reckon they wouldn't let them see stuff?
But he's going to do it. It's not going to happen. I cannot see it happening. I just can't see it happening. Not the way things are going.
Can I just say on that? I thought his question on security was so off the wall, and you can hear me sort of pausing my voice, thinking, "How on earth am I going to say to this? What am I going to say to this?" And I just came up with some utter nonsense, which is clear nonsense. Now, it's obviously terrible.
Well, you said, I think the machine will pretty quickly move to safeguard security. I mean the civil service machine. That indicates to me that you are intimating that the civil service wouldn't show Jeremy Corbyn's security documents.
But it's clear nonsense. That's not even how these things work.
But that's what you said.
I know, but I know it's awful in the cold light of day, but I was just trying to feed him some bit of nonsense because I just thought his questions were off the wall, and I was just trying to think of something. He was obviously playing me, but I thought to myself, Greg, you've gone like, what's happened to you, Greg? And I was just trying to give him a sort of line to sort of shut him up on it, because I just thought he was being bizarre.
When we were on Politics Live earlier today, you said, well, look, this was just joshing, it was all banter. Yeah. But having listened to that and having looked at the whole transcript, it doesn't strike me as the kind of banter that you kind of think trying to say it was, because a lot of the things that you're saying here are actually true, aren't they?
Well, it's not banter in as much as there's a sort of cut and thrust, but I'm trying to sort of make him, because I know he's very active in the Canterbury constituency, terribly complacent about the election. I'm trying to sort of misdirect him, which, Well,
you said he was complacent a moment ago. You said he said that he didn't think the Conservatives would win.
Well, no, but I'm trying to maintain his complacency, if you like, and.
Is that what friends do to each other?
Well, you do in election campaigns, because there's a bit of there's a bit of sort of rivalry in these things, and it's a bit like behind when your team is in the FA Cup final, or is a few points away from winning the Premier League, and you sort of play these sort of silly games with who you think are your mates from other teams. And by the way, talking about the state of play at that point in the campaign, it was an issue in the YouGov poll. I think that had come out well at that point. And I'm always a pessimist. I am always a pessimist. I remember when Leicester were playing Tottenham, the game they had to beat Tottenham to win the Premier League in 2016, and I was convinced that Leicester were going to lose because I'm such a pessimist. So I'm always a pessimist.
A West Ham fan.
And by the way, you go around every candidate Tory or Labour, they might come on your show and say, "Oh, we're going to win," but every candidate goes into that count thinking they're going to lose. That's what happens.
Yeah,
in
well,
politics.
I thought I was going to lose, and I did. But look, I'm just going to spend a few more minutes on this because I do actually want to try and look seriously at some of the other points that you made here, because you say we held Canterbury because of middle-class Guardian reading people, but then the Tories take Bolsover off Labour. It wouldn't surprise me. The electoral map has been going topsy-turvy because of Brexit and Corbyn, and that's all true, isn't it?
Well, it's certainly true that when you look at what's happening in the electorate, that Labour have done well disproportionately in cities, university cities recently, and less well in towns recently. And the question is that a long-term trend, or is that something that can be turned around in this general election campaign? I'm obviously fighting very hard on the future of the NHS, and I think pointing out to people that the NHS really is in peril with 5 more years of Boris Johnson, I think is a message which is important to many towns. But it's nothing. I don't think anybody would be surprised at the observation that Labour's doing better in university cities and has done in recent council elections, for example, less well in towns.
But you've been travelling all over the country, and presumably you've been talking to people in some of these northern and Midland seats where I know Jackie Smith, she was in Workington on Saturday with her son, and she said that she and her son were getting loads of die-hard Labour voters saying to them on the doorstep, no, they're going to vote for Boris because he's going to get Brexit done. And that has cut through, hasn't it? And all your comments here are just reflecting that.
Well, I think at the start of this campaign, that was definitely the case. I think things have shifted now. And I think the reason things have shifted is that the coverage of the NHS in recent days has really begun to sow seeds of doubt in people's minds about Boris Johnson and 5 more years of the Conservative Party. When the YouGov poll came out a week or so ago, I think it gave the Tories a 60-seat majority, didn't it?
68.
68 seat.
And there's a new one of those coming out in 45 minutes.
Yeah, a 68-seat majority. I think people have looked at that and are beginning to ask themselves, do they really want 5 more years of the Tories running our NHS? Do they really want 5 more years of the waiting lists growing higher and higher and higher? So I think, from my campaigning in the last sort of week or so, I think things have shifted decisively in Labour's favour, and that's why I'm going to continue to campaign on the future of the NHS.
So your view on Bolsover, Mansfield and Ashfield, 3 seats you talk about here, you say, I don't think we're going to get there. It's dire for the Labour Party up there in these traditional working areas. You now think that you're going to retain all of them?
We don't actually hold Mansfield at the moment, but
this is true.
I think that things have shifted decisively. I mean, for example, I was in the Mansfield, the greater Mansfield area, a place called Clipston, which actually comes under the Sherwood constituency next door to Mansfield, talking about how we're going to invest in miners' healthcare, how we're going to invest in specialist clinics for retired miners in that area. And I think as the campaign has progressed, and we've talked about our policies on the NHS, and our policies on transport, and our policies on the future of schools, I think we're now turning things around in those constituencies. So I suspect when the MRP, the YouGov poll comes out tonight, I suspect it'll give a different result, a different prediction for those constituencies.
A lot of people will say that this exemplifies the problem with politicians. They say one thing in private and another thing in public, and that's what you accuse many Conservatives of doing. Do you understand why people listening to this conversation will not be convinced by your explanation that it was just banter?
Well, look, as you know, in the House of Commons, amongst the Labour Party and Labour colleagues and Tory colleagues, people always, banter, gossip with each other, wind each other up, tell each other stories all the time across the political spectrum. Nobody expects those conversations to be recorded on phones. By the way, someone told me it's illegal. I don't know if it is illegal, but someone told me it was illegal. I've got no idea if that's true or not. But no one expects that, right? That is not the same as saying that you're saying one thing in private, but you believe something different and you're saying something different in public. I fundamentally believe that a Labour government is the only way of rescuing our National Health Service. I fundamentally believe that only a Labour government elected on Thursday can end the scandal of rising child poverty when we've got more food banks in this country than McDonald's at the moment. I fundamentally believe that a Labour government asking the richest in society to pay a little bit more in tax and investing in our schools, investing in our transport infrastructure, investing in our NHS is the right solution to the country's problems. And that is something I'll say in private and I'll say it in public.
How did you first learn about this?
When it was on the website this morning.
So they didn't approach you and ask you about it at all?
No, but that's the...
And describe to me how you felt at that moment.
I just thought, oh, Greg, have you really done that? Send him a text.
Did you read out? You're going to read out the text. So I think it is something that I would be appalled if anybody who I regarded as a friend, and you clearly did regard him as a friend, did this. There must be an enormous sense of betrayal.
Well, I'm not saying he was like my best friend, but we were mates. We did chat and gossip and all that sort of stuff. But, I'm trying to find it because I've been inundated with so many text messages saying to me, keep going. Can't believe someone did that, and things of that nature. Let me just. I just think I sent him a message. Where is it? Message saying, that's unfair. I thought we were mates. He's not read it. It's not got the blue ticks on it. Anyway, look, he thinks he's done the right thing because he wants to stop the Labour getting in. That's what he wants to do. Fair enough.
And
I am stupid for having...
Who was the first person you called?
Who was the first person I called? Gosh. Well, I was actually going around the studios at the at Millbank, so I'm not quite sure who the first person I called. Probably the Labour Party press office when I realised, actually, and said, look, I'm doing media and I think I should carry on. And I did carry on, and I came on, what's it called, Politics Live, and talked about it.
And Jeremy Corbyn, that must have been a bit of a #awkward conversation.
He was very understanding.
But if you win a majority on Thursday, do you still expect to be Secretary of State for Health after all this? Because there will be a lot of angry people among Jeremy Corbyn's entourage about this, won't there?
Well, that's up to Jeremy Corbyn. We always serve at the whim of the leader, and it's up to Jeremy Corbyn to put the cabinet together that he thinks are the best people to implement the Labour Party manifesto. It's up to him. He'll make that decision when we win on Thursday.
He says when, not if. Should we move on?
Entirely up to you. I'm happy to talk about this.
I think we should move on because there are a lot of serious issues in this election, a lot of which haven't been covered in the campaign at all. You're not Shadow Foreign Secretary, so I'm not going to talk to you about foreign affairs. But by the way, where is Emily Thornberry? She seems to have disappeared from public view.
She's probably campaigning hard for a Labour victory.
Not on the media, she isn't. Diane Abbott, we haven't heard anything from
campaigning hard for a Labour victory.
Well, yeah, but there was a terror attack last week, and we haven't heard anything from the Shadow Home Secretary, which I think is a little odd. We've heard nothing from the Brexit Secretary, Shadow Brexit Secretary in this election, and this is supposed to be the Brexit election. 3 of your big hitters. Now, you've been out all over the studios every day, as has Barry Gardner, as has Annalise Dodds, but there seems to be a very small group of people in the Labour Party who are actually allowed out onto the airwaves.
Well, given what's happened to me today, you'll probably have them all queuing up tomorrow in your studio, Ian.
It is a bit odd, though, isn't it?
Well, I mean, look, this is an election about the future of the NHS, isn't it, really? And that's why I've been very active. But it's also about safeguarding the NHS from a trade deal, which was why Barry has been very active as well, because he's our trade spokesperson.
Now, let's move on to talk about the subject that you are responsible for, health policy. You've done your best to get it to the forefront of the election campaign, which yesterday you were very successful in. A lot of people think this photograph of the 4-year-old was some sort of political stunt.
Well, I don't think it was. I mean, I understand the photograph was in the newspapers because the family put it there. I understand. That's as I understand it. If I'm wrong on that, I apologise to the family.
That is absolutely true. And James Mitchinson, the editor of the Yorkshire Post, has I just tweeted it a few minutes ago, well, about an hour or two ago actually, explaining exactly the sequencing of events, because there were so many people last night on Twitter and social media that were trying to say this was all a put-up job by Momentum and it was all sort of a Labour Party stunt. Now, it clearly is not, and I'm quite happy to make that very clear because I do believe the editor of the Yorkshire Post version of events. But it is quite worrying, though, that so many people automatically now think, because there'll be some anonymous Twitter account that says, "Oh no, I've heard from a nurse in that hospital."
Yeah, I saw that.
That. I mean, it spreads like wildfire.
I mean, nonsense and lies spreads like wildfire, doesn't it? You're absolutely right on Twitter and Facebook. It's sort of.
But should we though look at one very unfortunate example and think, well, that's typical of the health service? It is a bit weird that so much time has been spent on one very sad incident.
But it's not atypical, that is the problem.
Isn't it?
No, well, I mean, there was another photo today on the front page of the Mirror, wasn't there, of a baby girl on a chair, not able to get a bed, and the front page of the Independent didn't have a photo, but it had a story of a 12-year-old girl with special needs had to wait 57 hours in A&E in Essex for a specialist bed. So we know the NHS is under desperate crisis, and I would say after 10 years of Tory cutbacks and cutting the beds in the NHS, a discussion we've had many times before. So, look, I don't think these pictures are one-offs, sadly. And of course, the start of the campaign, we had pictures of elderly people sort of wasting away on trolleys in corridors for hours upon hours upon hours. So, look, our NHS is in a desperate state, and it's actually why I believe we need a Labour government to put the investment in and recruit the doctors and nurses we need.
Boris Johnson got a lot of negative publicity over that interview he did with Joe Pike from ITV's Calendar programme, where he initially refused to look at the picture that Joe Pike was trying to show him. He then took the phone and put it in his pocket, which I still find one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen. What would you have done in those circumstances? Because if you are Health Secretary, there are going to be instances like this, aren't there? How would you have reacted in that situation?
Well, I'd have been appalled because I'm a father of two little girls, and I know the absolute pain that a parent goes through when they see their child in distress and ill, because you just want to make everything okay for your child. So I would have been appalled at the picture.
But he said he was as well.
I would have apologised directly to the family, tried to get in touch with them if they'd have taken my call. And look, I know the Secretary of State turned up at the hospital to sort of, I'm not quite sure what he did there in truth, but, the reason why this is happening in our hospitals is because they've not had the funding for many, many years. So I would hope that after putting in the extra funding into the NHS and recruiting the extra doctors and nurses, we're able to treat people more quickly in our currently overstretched A&E departments.
Do you think it's responsible for Labour to use the NHS as a political football? Because you obviously want to get the NHS into the limelight in the election campaign, and it is a massive issue about what we do. But when the debate is constantly dominated, and this is not the first election campaign this has happened in, but when it's constantly dominated by accusations of privatisation, and in this election campaign obviously selling it off to the Americans and all the rest of it, it's a pretty unedifying look, isn't it?
But remember, our NHS has got a huge... It's the biggest element of public expenditure, over sort of, different years, but say for the sake of argument, around £130 billion of public expenditure. That's the biggest chunk of public expenditure. The decisions about how much to spend on our NHS are political decisions. Now, obviously, we don't want to use patients suffering an illness as a political football, but fundamentally, a general election campaign is going to have to debate the future of the National Health Service.
But this campaign hasn't. That's the problem. It's just accusation and counter-accusation, and we haven't actually got into the nitty-gritty of proper NHS policy because you're obsessed by talking about privatisation.
Well,
and the Tories, if they wanted to privatise the health service, they've had 45 years out of the 70 they've been in control of it. Wouldn't they have done it by now?
Well, I would say they are doing it, because around £10 billion worth of contracts go out to the private sector, like patient transport contracts.
But you know as well as I do that the private sector contracts in the Labour government from 1997 to 2010, and they increased privatisation far more than this government has.
But it's about £10 billion worth of contracts going out today, including most recently cancer scanning services at Oxford University's Hospital Trust went out to the private sector. So it is going on under this Tory government, and I don't think that's in the interest of patients.
That's not privatisation. That is private sector contracts providing a service. Privatisation, people think of selling things off to the private sector, selling hospitals off to the private sector. That hasn't happened.
Well, it's actually even worse than that, because what we essentially do is we pay a private sector organisation to provide us a service. So we're paying for the service, and they're extracting profit from what we're paying to them. What I say, rather than giving these contracts to companies which extract profit, let's make sure all the money in the health service is going to patients by keeping contracts in-house.
Do you want to eradicate all private sector functions from the health service?
Well, not all functions, because I think I'm anticipating your next question now. But I do not want clinical services going out to the private sector, and things like catering and cleaning. These things can come back in-house now.
Well, if they can be done at a lower cost and an equal quality, I mean, I'm not ideological on this, but I mean that is arguable as to whether that could be the case. But even clinical services, if a private sector company, I mean, often Bupa are taking on NHS operations because they can't be performed in the NHS because the capacity isn't there. Now, you might say, well, over time we want to bring it back. But there's nothing wrong with people carrying out those operations if they're doing it at the same price that the NHS charges.
Well, often these private hospitals have standards of safety which are much worse than...
Really?
Yeah, they do actually. Yeah, there's a report about a year or so ago following something called the Patterson inquiry, where lots of horrendous things went wrong around... with a breast surgeon. So they do generally tend to have worse standards.
But there will
of
always
safety.
be examples, whether it's in the private sector or the NHS, of things going wrong. I mean, that's just inevitable in the NHS, isn't it? Because if you carry out an operation, it's a risky business.
Yeah.
So you obviously want to mitigate those risks. But you quote that example from the private sector. I could equally quote what's happened in Shrewsbury Hospital, which, I mean, that's obviously an NHS hospital. Things have gone terribly wrong there. So we can all sort of trade bad things that have happened. But in the end, it's the big picture that you've got to look at, isn't it? I mean, we talked earlier about, when we were on the BBC, about the geriatric care, where my family experience of that was absolutely appalling, where virtually everyone else in these geriatric wards shouldn't have been there.
Yeah.
And so they are taking up beds that should be used for people who really need them in a hospital.
Yeah, and I want to get onto that big picture stuff because, you know, the big picture stuff is that we're going to put £40 billion extra cash into the National Health Service. We're going to recruit more doctors and more nurses. And actually, we're going to invest in social care as well. Because one of the problems, as we were discussing earlier today, is that because of the pressures on the NHS, you've sort of got a queue of people trying to get in to the overcrowded A&Es, and that's partly because the NHS has lost 17,000 beds under the Tories. But you've also got people queuing to get out of the hospital because the social...
How many beds did it lose under Labour? Remind me.
Well, there was a huge number of beds lost, but we had this discussion earlier.
Well, we did, but you just fall into the trap of blaming it on the Tories when we all know that under the Blair and Brown governments, the number of beds that were lost was more. This is political game playing again.
Well, the problem is I think the bed cuts have now gone too far. And
we're agreed on that.
Because as medical advances, as medicine advances and treatment advance, you can go into hospital and have a procedure and come out on the same day. We don't need the huge numbers of beds that we had, for example, in the 70s and early 80s in the NHS. But we've been cutting too many beds now in the NHS, and a lot of the sort of, the sort of health experts are saying this, probably influenced by the very persuasive essay that you wrote once on your blog.
Well, you never know. It's still there for anyone that wants to read it. Look, I haven't asked you really about Donald Trump. There are lots of things that our callers want to talk to you about, so I'm going to finish my questions with this last one.
Okay.
Did Labour pay for taxis for a Labour activist to appear at Leeds General Infirmary where Matt Hancock was visiting yesterday?
No.
Categorically no.
As far as I'm aware, I've been told not. I don't know if you've got some local evidence, but as far as I'm aware...
Absolutely not, but that was the accusation. I just wanted to put it to you.
Not
right, it's over to you in a moment to put your questions to, I nearly said Matt Hancock, Jonathan Ashworth, Labour Shadow Secretary of State for Health. And don't forget, you can watch us on the LBC website, Twitter page, Facebook feed and YouTube channel. It's 9:30, latest news headlines with Lucinda Horsley.
A senior Labour politician has told LBC he thinks a leaked conversation of him calling Jeremy Corbyn's prospects abysmal was planned.
He's played me like a fiddle. I'm stupid for falling for it. It is a pretty desperate, dirty trick.
Jonathan Ashworth has apologised after being heard saying the party wouldn't get a majority in this week's election. The clip of the Shadow Health Secretary talking to a Conservative friend was leaked to right-leaning blog Guido Fawkes. The Prime Minister said it's proof Labour's losing votes over its Brexit stance on the penultimate day of election campaigning. The Liberal Democrats say they'll do what they can to stop the UK leaving the EU. A police officer's been killed in a shooting in the US state of New Jersey. Police in Jersey City across the Hudson River from New York say 2 more officers and a civilian were injured during heavy gunfire. Democrats in Washington have announced formal impeachment charges against Donald Trump. They accuse the US president of abusing his power by trying to get his political rival investigated, which he's always denied. LBC weather: rain over England and Wales will clear eastwards this evening. Clear spells for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but also some showers, staying quite windy overnight, a low of 2 degrees.
This is LBC.
Make their Christmas wishes come true. Whether they love Disney's Frozen 2, want to jet off on Barbie's Dream Plane, or ready up with the Fortnite Battle Royale collection. At littlewoods.com, you'll find all the toys they love, all with inclusive delivery and free returns. Own Christmas. Shop now at littlewoods.com.
Turn to The Telegraph for clarity on the general election. Follow every moment with our live blogs, podcasts and WhatsApp groups. See what the result could mean for you and Britain, with expert reporting from the team that's closest to Westminster. Subscribe today at telegraph.co.uk.
Play along with our 10-second teaser. Ready? Which sector generates more revenue than movies, cruise ships, recorded music, theme parks and spectator sports combined? The answer is gambling. If you got that right, you must be pretty smart. So you'll know who to choose for your business accounting, audit and tax affairs. Search Barnes Rofe. Clever accountants for business.
So, what am I taking on this mission?
This gadget is a paperclip that's also a transmitter.
Wow.
Look, toothpaste that burns through glass.
Whoop-de-doo. What about these little things?
Invisible hearing aids. They fit completely in the ear.
Brilliant. How do I put them in?
You don't. They're for my ears only. Invisible hearing aids at transparent prices. From £495 at Specsavers. Ask in store for details.
Your old car, your loyal friend, so many memories. It's impossible to leave their side.
Until now, get £5,000 off a selected brand new Citroën when you trade in your old car.
Alors, out with the old, in with the new. Hello Citroën, hello comfort.
The Citroën Swappage. Trade in your old car for a brand new Citroën, including the award-winning SUV range.
Citroën.
Discount on OTR price of selected Citroëns excluding C1. Registered by the 31st of December when trading in a qualifying vehicle. Not in conjunction with other offers. Search Citroën Swappage for full T's and C's.
You're in leakage, you're in leak.
Tenna Men. Pants and pads. Buy online or in shops. Tenna Men. Keep control.
Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 9:34. I see your friend Mr. Baker has been tweeting.
Has he? What's he said?
He said, if someone tells you about a threat to national security that they say could only be avoided by asking civil servants to act unconstitutionally, there's a duty to tell people about it.
But that's not what happened, though, is it? He gave me some leading question, and I just sort of gave him some sort of nonsense, taking the piss answer. Sorry to swear again.
We apologise again.
I'm sorry to the listeners. But look, anyway, Greg, you think you've done the right thing. I'm not sure if, you're the chief exec of Guide, a political intelligence agency. I think a lot of people will be very wary about offering you contracts in the future. But anyway, there we are. He thinks he's done the right thing, and I'll probably never see him again.
Excuse me. Let's go to Simon in Orpington for our first question. Hi, Simon.
Hi, good evening, gents. Jonathan, my question for you is, why would the Labour Party give Leavers no credible leave option in your second referendum?
Okay, do you want me to go straight into that?
Yep.
Well, I mean, we think it would be a credible leave option, because what will happen is our cabinet will go and negotiate a leave option with the or leave deal with the European Union, one which we think safeguards jobs, safeguards environmental standards and workplace standards, and in the end would put that back to the people for a final say. So we think it is credible.
Okay, the issue there, Jonathan, is that Mrs May's deal wasn't credible enough for Leavers, and they made their voices heard at the European elections when people deserted the Conservative Party. People from the left and right voted for the Brexit Party because it wasn't a credible leave option. You're going to have a customs union and close alignment with the single market. That is not what Leavers want. And as I say, they've already made their voices heard on that. So you are not giving Leavers a credible leave option. Why not just be honest and say you are the party of Remain? You're full of Remainers, and that's fine. But if you look at your front bench, it's full of Remainers. You are the Remain party, aren't you?
No, we're the party trying to bring the country together, because the country is desperately divided, and we think people just need to have the final say.
Well, how are we going to bring the country together by having a second referendum with no credible leave option when Leavers have already rejected Mrs May's offer at the European elections? How does that bring people together?
Well, we think it is because we would be leaving the European Union. We wouldn't be part of the European Union with the deal that we'll be offering to the British people.
But we'll be leaving in name only. Why would we want to be in a customs union and delegate our powers to make deals? Why would we want our goods to be tied in with the single market. That's not leaving, is it?
But when you do trade deals across the country, then you're across the world. I beg your pardon. Then you're on your where you described it. Goods are tied in, so you get tied into the rules of the World Trade Organization. There's obviously no democratic oversight of that either. So when you do trade,
we would have our ability to negotiate our own trade deals. That's why we want to leave the EU. We have freedom of divergence on goods, and that's why we wanted to leave the EU. If you're tying us in to the single market, because Keir Starmer has said that he wants to have us tied in as close as possible so we have no customs checks. The EU have said you're either in the single market or you're outside of the single market. So that one's already been crossed off. So you will come back with a deal where we're inside the single market. How on earth are you bringing people back together on that? What you're doing is you're alienating Brexiteers, and 5 million of those are your own voters. So I agree with your comments that you said in private. Labour are seen as the Brexit blockers, and they will be seen as the entire. They will be the entire Brexit stoppers. There will be no Brexit under the Labour Party.
All right, Simon, thank you.
Okay.
I mean, just on that, he does make a valid point there, because I think you have said that if there was another referendum, you would vote and campaign for Remain, as most of the shadow cabinet have who've offered a view. I think Angela Rayner didn't when she was asked about it yesterday. But people do feel a sense of betrayal because they don't regard this sort of Labour Leave deal as in any shape leaving the European Union.
Well, I hope we can convince them that it is a leave deal, because it is leaving the European Union. And of course, even in Boris Johnson's deal, there are still some ties to the European Union. So I think people that we've got to demonstrate to the British people that when we negotiate this deal, when we have a Labour government in the next couple of days, that it is credible, but it also safeguards jobs and prosperity for people in the United Kingdom. And I think people will see that in the end, because fundamentally we are leaving the European Union with the deal that we're negotiating.
Right, let's go to Ian in Uxbridge. Ian, what would you like to say?
Yeah, good evening. Good evening. It's your guest. It's Jonathan, isn't it, Jonathan?
Yes, hi, or John. I don't mind.
Yeah, or John, yeah. What I wanted to ask, and it's going to sound like a really stupid question, I believe, but nobody seems to be able to answer it. Why can't the NHS be taken out of the political arena? Why does it always have to be in the political arena? In other words, like, if you introduce an NHS tax and that money was ring-fenced and all that money was used only for the NHS, and then you wouldn't keep hearing about all these extra billions that you're going to put in every time there's an election.
Well,
does that sound like a silly question?
No, it's not a silly question. It's a very good question, and often health economists ask this and ponder it. So it's an excellent question. Why is it in the political arena? Because fundamentally, you're talking about 130 odd billion pounds worth of public expenditure, which is the biggest chunk of public expenditure. So politicians are always going to have discussions and disagreements about the best way of spending that 130 billion pounds. The debate about whether you should pay a tax and then essentially hypothecate the yield of that tax to fund the NHS is one that's we've always sort of debated and looked at, and there are pros and cons to it. But one of the problems with it is if your economy goes through a sort of downturn, then you'll get less taxation from it, which would mean less money for your NHS. But these are things that people have always looked at, and although our tax plans are not necessarily, it's not an NHS tax in the way you describe it, we are saying we would increase tax for the wealthiest in society in order to fund the NHS and other public services.
To a great big pot, and nobody really knows where all the money goes. There's it's just, I don't know, it just doesn't seem to be any kind of anything overseeing what's going on in the NHS that's accountable.
I think you're right, because a local hospital is a huge part of a local economy. I mean, the local hospital down in Hillingdon, down in Uxbridge way, is a major employer in your part of the world, and I think it's right that there should be more democratic accountability of the decisions around the NHS, not just what national figures decide, like Secretaries of State, but also what local hospitals decide, and that is something that we'd want to introduce if we got elected.
When people say, why can't we take the politics out of the NHS, I always get really angry when people say that, because if it's consuming a sixth or a seventh of public expenditure, of course it's got to be politically accountable, doesn't it?
Yes, I mean that's the point I'm making. It's a huge chunk of public expenditure, but I think the point you are making is, could we have a slightly more edifying debate about the NHS? Because the thing is, we're all living longer as a society. We're all living, we're all aging, and as we age, we live with a wider array of complex conditions. And how do we design services to respond to that?
Can you guarantee me, though, that tomorrow we're not going to hear another campaign called 24 Hours to Save the NHS? Because it's a sort of scare tactic which has been used before. And I don't know if you saw in Private Eye, they did a list of all the occasions that Labour have used this over the years, and it's virtually every year, every election, it's trotted out. And it's bunkum, isn't it?
Well, I'm not the campaign manager,
but you are Shadow Health Secretary.
But I know it's. I know you get frustrated with the rhetorical flight of it, but I do think the future of the NHS is hugely in peril and on the ballot in this general election campaign. Because look, people have got to ask themselves: do they really want Boris Johnson running the NHS for 5 more years? 5 more years of the waiting list, which is already at record levels, getting worse and worse. 5 more years of young people who need mental health support not getting it. 5 more years of those with cancer waiting beyond 2 months for treatment. Do people really want the Tories running the NHS for another 5 years?
All right, Dave is in Devon. Hello, Dave.
Hi.
Hello. What's your question, please?
Hi, Mr. Ashworth.
Hi.
I'm an NHS junior doctor, and I've got a main question I want to ask you, and a sort of follow-on question.
Okay.
So the first question is: you've been talking a lot about private finance.
He's dropped off. We're going to get Dave back because he's got a good question there. Andrew's in Gravesend. Andrew, what would you like to say?
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, Mr. Ashworth.
Hiya. Call me John.
I doubt whether or not you're talking to your mate or whether he's still your mate anymore. But if you are, just thank him for me. Buy him a drink for me on my behalf. Any expose of Mr. Corbyn as being unfit to lead this country is fine by me. Let's fast forward now to Friday morning and a scenario where Labour have lost this general election, and I sincerely hope you do, because you deserve to. Will you be standing for leadership of the Labour Party, Mr. Ashworth?
Well, first of all, I doubt I'm going to see Greg, my mate, so you'll have to track him down and buy him a drink yourself, I'm afraid, Andrew. So he's not, he lives in Canterbury now, but he's
well, Mr. Ashworth, you've obviously heard on the doorsteps from what I suspect are traditional Labour voters telling you how toxic Mr. Corbyn is. You've spoken to your friend about that, and I'm asking you now, given that toxicity, Mr. Ashworth, will you be standing for leader of the Labour Party on Friday morning, if you do in fact lose?
No. And we're not going to lose.
And who would you suggest takes over then, Mr. Ashworth?
Jeremy Corbyn's going to be the Prime Minister on Friday morning.
Well, you've got to say that, obviously, but let's entertain the remote possibility that he might not win the election and become Prime Minister. No Labour leader can survive 2 general election defeats, can they?
I think Jeremy Corbyn's going to win. I think he's going to be the Prime Minister. And I'm campaigning for him. And I'm campaigning for him because I want to change this country. I'll be campaigning in Bassett Law tomorrow because I want to change this country.
But you look at the opinion polls and they do not show, and John Curtis, who we all have to revere, we all do revere, he said the chances of Labour winning an outright majority are virtually nil. So if we entertain that possibility, are you actually ruling yourself out of a leadership contest, or just that you wouldn't announce it on Friday?
Well, first of all, I am loyal to Jeremy Corbyn, and he is the leader of the Labour Party, and I believe will be the Prime Minister on Friday. And, that's that. But just before Eddie, just to reassure Andrew in Gravesend, I am not running for the leader of the Labour Party. Wouldn't be putting myself forward.
Okay, Andrew, thank you. We will come back to Dave in Devon in just a moment. It's 9:46.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, Tom Swarbrick.
Jon Ashworth's having a laugh, joking around that Corbyn's a security risk, that they tried to push him out too soon, that he's not going to win the election. Hilarious. Who's laughing along?
Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
Hello. If you find it hard to get a good night's sleep, try My Pillow. 45 million pillows have sold in the US, and now they're manufactured in the UK. Designed for better sleep by one of those brash Americans.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, the inventor of My Pillow, and I give you a 60-day money-back guarantee, so you have nothing to lose.
They just can't help themselves. Mind you, My Pillow does come with a 10-year warranty. Get 30% off your first order using promo code SLEEP at mypillow.co.uk.
Psst. We've got something to tell you about the Honda Jazz. We know it looks small, but inside, it's really big. That's why we've created the small but big Jazz event, where you can get 0% APR representative and 5 years complimentary servicing on all grades until the 31st of January. The Honda Jazz, the small car with the big offer. Visit your local dealer to find out more. Honda dealers are credit brokers, not lenders. Finance provided by Honda Finance Europe, authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Terms and conditions apply.
You're in leakage, you're in leak.
Tenna Men. Pants and pads. Buy online or in shops. Tenna Men. Keep control.
You need an alibi.
This is your mother's murder we're talking about here.
What happened to her? Who killed her?
An original crime drama new to Alibi.
Why has no one ever told me my mother was dismembered?
You need to stop sleuthing.
From the makers of Happy Valley.
The investigation seemed inept to me.
And starring Line of Duty's Martin Compston and BAFTA winner Molly Windsor. Traces.
It can be painful wrecking up the past.
Continues tonight at 9 on Alibi. All episodes available on demand.
For the independent bookseller who found you that first edition.
For the baker who brings the smell of freshly baked bread to your door.
And for the barista who never needs to ask your name.
We've all got a part to play.
Every little tap keeps your high street alive.
And helps your communities thrive.
So if you love where you live, shop small.
Shop small with American Express. And when you spend £10 or more, we'll credit you with £5 back. Search Shop Small. Offer available on selected cards. Enrolment required. Available in-store. Participating merchants only. Once per location up to £50.
Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 9:48. Jonathan Ashworth is with us, Labour Shadow Secretary of State for Health, taking your calls. Dave in Devon dropped off the line, but he's back. Dave, you're a junior doctor. What would you like to ask Jonathan?
Hello again.
Hi, Dave.
Hi, Mr. Ashworth. Sorry, bad phone signal.
No problem.
So you've been talking a lot about private financial initiatives over the last couple of weeks. I just wanted to know, I understand that when you were a junior minister back in the Brown, when you were an advisor at the Treasury back in the Brown administration, didn't you work on a lot of the PFI deals and signed off a few of them?
No.
I understood you did.
No, I didn't. No, not worked on any PFI deal in my life.
So when Mr. Brown was in office and a lot of the PFI contracts were signed, you had nothing to do with any of those?
No.
No, never.
Never.
That's contrary to a lot of stuff I've been reading.
On Guido Fawkes?
Not just on Guido Fawkes.
Where else you had it?
On a number of different websites, actually.
Well, it's not true. I've not worked on any. I've not worked on any PFI deal in my life.
I'm just a little bit concerned because as someone who works in the NHS has seen what PFI can do. I'm just a little bit concerned about people who may present one kind of picture, but the reality is in the background other things might be going on.
Which hospital are you at?
I work in Devon.
Yeah, which hospital?
I work across a lot of different hospitals.
Oh right, okay. I was at some hospitals in Devon recently. As at hospitals?
No, not PFIs in Devon. I've worked all over the country, as many of us do. We move around all over the place.
Yeah, I was just wondering where you were at the moment. So you could tell us what it's like on the front line.
On the front line, it's busy. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's busy everywhere. That's one of my sort of secondary follow-on question was, I've done my second consecutive 70-hour week, one of your other policies that Mr. McDonnell's sort of spouting is to make everyone work 32 hours a week. I don't quite know how that's going to compute because most of my friends have emigrated off to New Zealand and Australia because they don't want to work here anymore because we don't get paid that well. We get treated pretty poorly by our employers, and we already work pretty tough shifts. So I don't know where you're going to find another essentially double the amount of doctors because I certainly don't think I'm going to be paid 40 hours of overtime a week for the work I do.
Okay. What are your rota gaps like where you are at the moment?
We've probably got about between a tenth and a third of our rota unfilled.
And have they got one of those electronic rostering systems now, or do you still have to sort of...
Yeah, we do have an electronic rostering system, yeah.
Right. Which hospital again?
So at the moment, I'm in a hospital in the southwest of England.
Okay. Well, look, there isn't going to be. I
don't want to be specific with you.
Okay, no, fair enough.
About where I work.
No, fair enough. No, but there isn't going to be a 4-day week imposed upon the NHS, so I can reassure you of that, Dave. But keep up your brilliant work helping people on the front line. I know you're all under intense pressure at the moment.
Just on this 4-day-a-week thing, can you clear this up? Because there seems to be a bit of confusion over whether it would apply to the NHS.
No.
Jon McDonnell said it would originally.
No, so there's not going to be any mandatory 4-day week imposed upon the NHS. What Jon McDonnell was saying wasn't actually contradictory to the point I was making. He was saying that he wants to reduce average working hours across the economy as a whole, and if you're going to reduce average working hours across the economy as a whole, you'd obviously include the hours worked in the NHS as part of your calculation. But at the moment in the NHS, as Dave, our hard-working junior doctor, was indicating...
You sound doubtful as if whether Dave is an actual junior doctor.
No, I think he is a junior doctor.
Okay.
Our NHS staff, as Dave will know, are working 1 million extra hours per week over and above their contracted hours. So, we need to put more investment in the NHS to get more staff in the NHS.
Dave, thank you. Let's go to David in Nottingham. Hello, David.
Hiya, I just want to ask about the provision of child cancer treatments throughout the UK. So my daughter had cancer, and luckily we live about 15, 20 minutes away from the hospital, depending on traffic. But there are people on the ward that when we were there, that are having to travel 50 miles to get to hospital for an appointment. Yeah. And now these appointments, you have to get to hospital very, very quickly. And the cost of doing that, and the cost burden that you have as a parent with a child going through cancer is unbelievable. You would not understand. I was lucky in that I'm a civil servant, so I could get more than the statutory amount of time off full pay. But there are other people on the ward where both parents couldn't be with the child in what is the worst period of their lives, or one person would have to give up their job and live out from handouts from friends and family, or through their savings. I know people who sell their house to have to be able to continue to exist because they're lucky enough to have one of their children have cancer. I know people who don't see their child Monday to Friday and only see them on the weekend because they work 50 miles away and have to get to hospital in that time. There are some cancers that children have that you have to be in hospital for months and months. I can't remember what one it is, but one of the leukemias, or it might be both of them, when you have leukemia, you cannot leave a properly sealed condition, clean ward. And it's absolutely ridiculous. The amount of hoops and troubles we have to go through.
David, we've only got 6 minutes left. I want to squeeze in another question.
But I have got to. Can I quickly answer that? I mean, David, you're absolutely right. So one of the things that we want to introduce is a cancer travel fund, so people who are travelling those long distances that you've identified get their travel for free, because those bills really can add up for the parents, and it's just an extra stress that parents don't need when their child has cancer.
Okay, David, thank you. Salman is in Mill Hill. What's your question, please, Salman?
Good evening, gentlemen. I'm a pharmacy owner for 40 years. We do lots of things apart from dispensing prescription. I've done 500 flu jabs already. Travel vaccines. We're part of the 111 system. We take the pressure away from doctors and A&E. Why is Labour planning to close 12,000 high street pharmacies?
I don't think we are.
Well, Iain will be my witness, because 2 weeks ago he was interviewing Jon McDonnell, and my blood froze, because Jon McDonnell said we're trying to cancel all private contracts with the NHS. And Iain's question, Iain will back me up, was what about pharmacies? Jon McDonnell answered, yes, we'd like to bring actually, I think we should bring pharmacies in-house. Was that right, Iain?
He did say that, yes.
Yeah, but I think he wasn't talking about the community pharmacy on the high street, like the one which I think you're running, sir. And
he didn't differentiate.
No, but he probably should have done. I mean, he was talking.
No, sorry. Okay, sorry. Do you want to? I raised merry hell with our buddies that night and with our publications. And the next day, the National Pharmaceutical Association, our defence people, contacted the Labour Party, and they said, no, he didn't mean out in, he meant in. He meant about the contracts of private contracts of pharmacies in hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't get away with it that easily, because I had a pre-reg. I've been training from one of the major North London teaching hospitals a couple of weeks ago, and he told me that company, I don't know, already has lost his contract and it's already in-house. It's a difference between saying, I mean, he would have said, I'd like to bring in pharmacies in-house, rather than say, I'd like to bring all pharmacies services in-house. And funny, this is the headline I'm looking at in the Chemist and Druggist next day, that he said so. One of the answers was a Swedish pharmacist that did a runner from Sweden and worked here, and she's very happy. And she said the reason why this doesn't work, because we've got social pharmacy in Sweden, Mr. Corbyn's lovely Valhalla. And pharmacists don't bother. They don't do what I do. The competition on the high street, I go the extra mile. I deliver to people's doorsteps. We don't get paid for all of this, by the way. But they don't know people on first names. Pharmacies are community health centres. And for somebody to say, I'm going to put all pharmacies in a hen house or in a hospital.
We haven't got much time left, Simon, so I'm going to let Jonathan answer that.
He was talking about some of the pharmacists at hospitals which have been outsourced, so they're not the in-house pharmacies at hospitals. And he's not talking about community pharmacies like yours on the high street.
Okay, Chris in Darlington, and he's representing quite a few people who've texted and tweeted in. Jon Ashworth sounded very threatening and sinister talking to that junior doctor as if he was going to send the Momentum Boys round. To be fair, you did sound a bit odd in that, if I may say so.
Because I thought...
Did you suspect that he was a fake caller?
Well, I wondered if Dave was, sort of making points which weren't true. I've not signed off any PFI deal in my life or worked on any PFI deal, and I'm certainly not imposing a 4-day week on the National Health Service.
Jonathan, thank you very much for coming in tonight. You didn't have to, and I know it's been a very difficult day for obvious reasons, but we do appreciate you spending the time with us here on LBC. I will be back tomorrow from 7 on LBC. We have a cross-question panel to delight you tomorrow night. We have Paul Mason, we have Sarah Vine, we have Claire Fox, and we have Alistair Campbell. You don't get a much spicier panel than that, do you? So something to salivate over the next 24 hours. Darren Adams here at 1, but first here's Tom Swarbrick.
Ian, thank you. Evening to you. Welcome to the show. Tonight at 10.
I think in the security stuff, the machine will pretty quickly move to safeguard security things.
Labour Shadow Cabinet Minister Jon Ashworth suggests Jeremy Corbyn in number 10 would be a security risk and that he won't win in the election.
It's not going to happen. I cannot see it happening. I just can't see it happening. Not the way things are going.
Leaked by a long-time friend of Mr Ashworth tonight, the Labour bigwig says he was joking.
I'm joshing around with somebody who I thought was an old friend.
Proving the maxim true that if you want a friend in politics, get a dog. Is it a joke? Who's laughing? Is he, to your mind, really just telling the truth?